first sound wasn't the shouting. It was the heavy steel door slamming shut behind me. The echo rolled through the underground chamber like a cannon blast, swallowing every other sound. Dust drifted from the concrete ceiling as dozens of phone flashlights bounced wildly across the walls. My contractor, Ben, stood frozen beside the massive circular vault door we'd uncovered beneath the abandoned hotel's basement. His face had gone completely white. "What did you just do?" he whispered. "I didn't touch it." Neither of us had. Someone else had. A loud metallic click echoed from the other side, then another, and another. The ancient locking mechanism, untouched for decades, was somehow moving. Behind us, footsteps thundered down the basement stairs. "They're here!" one of the workers yelled. Before I could even turn around, the basement flooded with people wearing matching navy polo shirts, embroidered with the logo of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. At their center walked a woman with silver blonde hair, cut into a perfect bob. Expensive sunglasses still perched on her head despite being underground, and the unmistakable confidence of someone who believed the world belonged to her. "Mr. Carter?" she asked without offering a handshake. I nodded cautiously. She smiled. Not warmly, possessively. "My name is Victoria Langley," she said. "President of the HOA." I stared at her. "This hotel isn't part of your neighborhood." "It is now." Her attorney stepped beside her, carrying a leather briefcase. "We'll need the keys to that vault immediately." I actually laughed. "I don't have any keys." "You do now. We found this thing less than an hour ago." Victoria's smile disappeared. "I'll make this very simple. Everything inside that vault belongs to the association." My contractor looked at me as if she'd lost her mind. "What association?" Ben asked. "The Willow Creek Estates HOA. This hotel's been abandoned for almost 40 years. "Correct. So how can anything down here belong to you?" Victoria folded her arms. "Because we have documents proving that underground structure was transferred long before Mr. Carter purchased the hotel." I felt my stomach tighten. That couldn't be right. I'd spent months reviewing every title report, county filing, environmental survey, tax record, and deed before buying the old Riverside Grand Hotel. There hadn't been a single mention of an underground vault, not one. My attorney had confirmed the title was clean. So where was this coming from? A sheriff's deputy appeared at the top of the basement stairs, then another. Then two county officials carrying sealed envelopes. Victoria glanced at them and smiled wider than before. Perfect timing. One deputy walked directly toward me. "Mr. Carter?" "Yes?" He handed me the envelope. "You've been served." I tore it open. An emergency court order. The HOA was asking a judge to prohibit me from opening the vault, seize control of the entire basement level, and compel me to surrender every key, code, and access point to the property within 24 hours. I looked back at Victoria. She wasn't watching me anymore. She was staring at the vault. Almost, nervously, as though she wasn't worried about what I might find. She was terrified that I actually would. "My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 38 years old, and for the last 12 years I've made a living buying abandoned commercial properties that everyone else had given up on. Old factories, vacant schools, forgotten warehouses, you name it. Most investors chased luxury developments. I chased history. My wife used to joke that I never saw broken buildings. You see second chances, she'd tell me with a smile. She wasn't wrong. 3 years before everything happened, cancer took her from me. After that, work became more than a career. It became the only place where grief stayed quiet. Restoring old buildings gave me something I couldn't find anywhere else, a feeling that even the most damaged things could still have a future. That's exactly what I felt the first time I stood in front of the Riverside Grand Hotel in Riverside, Colorado. Its faded brick facade was covered in vines. Half the windows were boarded up. The lobby ceiling had partially collapsed, and pigeons had claimed the ballroom as their own. Most people saw an expensive demolition project. I saw one of the most beautiful buildings I'd ever laid eyes on. Built in 1928, the Riverside Grand had once hosted governors, movie stars, and traveling musicians. Then, a flood damaged part of the foundation in the late 1980s. Insurance disputes dragged on for years. The owners went bankrupt, and eventually the hotel was condemned and forgotten. When it came up for auction, only 2 bidders showed up. I won. After closing, I hired my longtime contractor, Ben Morales, a former Marine who had worked with me for nearly a decade. You always know how to pick the impossible ones, he laughed, as we unlocked the front doors for the first time. If it was easy, I replied, someone else would have bought it. For the first month, everything went surprisingly well. We cleaned debris, reinforced unstable walls, and worked closely with city inspectors. The neighbors were friendly. A retired teacher named Linda Dawson brought us homemade cookies every Friday. The owner of the diner across the street insisted we eat lunch there at least once a week. People were excited to see the hotel coming back to life. Then the letters started arriving. The first one was slipped under the front door without a stamp or return address. Private property notice. All subterranean areas must remain sealed. Ben read it twice before looking at me. Underground areas? There aren't any on the blueprints. We searched the original architectural plans again. Nothing. A week later, another note appeared, this time taped to the temporary construction fence. Stop digging. Some things were buried for a reason. Ben frowned as he peeled it off. You think someone's messing with us? I think someone doesn't want us finding something. He looked toward the old basement entrance, where demolition crews were scheduled to remove a cracked concrete storage floor the next morning. Neither of us knew that beneath that slab was a hidden steel hatch no blueprint had ever shown. And someone had been watching every move we made, waiting for the day we uncovered it. The next morning started like every other day on the project. By 7:30, the smell of fresh coffee mixed with concrete dust, compressors hummed through the old hotel, and Ben was already directing the demolition crew in the basement. Easy on that corner, he called. The foundation's older than all of us. I stood nearby, studying a set of structural drawings while a jackhammer chewed through the cracked storage floor. For nearly 20 minutes, everything sounded normal. Then the jackhammer stopped. "Boss!" one of the workers shouted. "You need to see this." I walked over and looked into the rectangular section they'd broken away. Instead of dirt, there was steel. A perfectly flat steel plate buried beneath nearly a foot of reinforced concrete. Ben knelt beside it and brushed away decades of dust. "This isn't part of the building." I crouched beside him. The edges were too precise. Whoever installed it had wanted it hidden forever. We spent another hour carefully exposing the entire outline. When the last section of concrete came away, we finally saw it. A circular hatch nearly 8 feet across with massive locking bolts around its perimeter. No handle, no visible hinges. Only one engraving remained readable beneath layers of rust. Protection. Ben scratched his head. Archive? I've restored 15 buildings, I said quietly. I've never seen anything like this. Before we could inspect it further, tires screeched outside. Then another vehicle. Then another. Ben glanced toward the basement windows. We expecting company? No. Heavy footsteps echoed through the hotel lobby. Seconds later, 6 men in matching navy polo shirts and khaki pants marched downstairs carrying clipboards, cameras, and folders as though they owned the place. Behind them came the woman I'd later know far too well, Victoria Langley. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask permission to enter. She simply looked at the steel hatch and smiled. There it is. I stepped in front of her. This is an active construction site. She ignored me completely. One of the men began taking photographs. Another started measuring the hatch. A third placed bright orange survey flags around it. "Excuse me," I said louder. "Who gave you permission to come onto my property?" Victoria finally turned toward me. "I don't require permission. You absolutely do." She reached into her designer handbag and removed a neatly folded document. "We've been waiting a very long time for someone to uncover this." She handed it to me. At first glance, it looked official. County seals, old signatures, legal descriptions. But something felt off. "The Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association," I read aloud, "claims beneficial ownership of all subterranean record storage beneath Parcel 14. I looked up. This hotel isn't Parcel 14. It is according to the amended boundary agreement. There is no amended boundary agreement. There is now. Ben stepped closer. You can't just rewrite property lines. Victoria's attorney, a tall man named Richard Sloan, smiled thinly. The county accepted the filing years ago. I pulled every recorded document before closing. I shot back. That filing doesn't exist. It wasn't indexed correctly. His answer came too fast, almost rehearsed. I folded the papers and handed them back. Then you won't mind if my attorney verifies them. Victoria's pleasant expression vanished. I'm afraid there isn't time for that. And why is that? Because beginning today, this area is under HOA protection. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You don't have authority over my property. We'll see what a judge thinks. She snapped her fingers. One of her assistants stepped forward and zip-tied a bright red notice to the steel hatch. Restricted access. "Do not open." I tore it off immediately. "This is private property." "So was the evidence." I froze. "What evidence?" For the first time, Victoria looked like she'd said more than she intended. Her attorney quickly interrupted. "She misspoke." "No," I replied slowly. "She didn't." The room went silent. Even the workers had stopped moving. Ben leaned toward me and whispered, "Did she just admit she already knows what's inside?" Before I could answer, flashing blue lights reflected through the basement windows. 2 sheriff's deputies walked in. One of them looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Carter," he said, "we received a complaint that you're attempting to destroy protected historical property." I stared at Victoria in disbelief. She folded her arms with complete confidence. Then she smiled, not because she thought she was winning, because she believed this had all been planned long before I ever bought the hotel. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't fighting an overbearing HOA anymore. I was standing in the middle of a scheme that had likely been years, maybe decades in the making. The deputies didn't shut down the construction that afternoon, but they did something almost as damaging. They told us not to touch the hatch until ownership could be clarified. It wasn't an order from a judge. It was a strong recommendation. That distinction mattered, but so did perception. Within hours, rumors spread across Riverside that I'd uncovered some kind of government bunker. By evening, drones hovered over the hotel, local bloggers crowded the sidewalk, and people pressed their faces against the chain-link fence, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious steel door. Ben locked the front gate and walked over to me. "This isn't about a vault anymore, I know. It's about whatever's making them panic." That night, I made 1 phone call. The next morning, Sarah Whitmore walked into my temporary office carrying 3 banker boxes, a laptop, and enough legal pads to fill a bookstore. Sarah had been my real estate attorney for almost 8 years. Before entering private practice, she'd spent a decade in the Colorado Attorney General's office investigating land fraud and title disputes. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't loud. She was dangerous because she noticed details everyone else ignored. She looked at the emergency injunction on my desk, then at the photographs of the steel hatch. "Interesting," she said. "That's all you've got?" She smiled faintly. The louder the accusation, the weaker the evidence usually is. Ben leaned against the doorway. "So where do we start?" Sarah opened the first box. "At the beginning." For 3 straight days, we dug through every document connected to the Riverside Grand Hotel. Original deeds, mortgage releases, tax assessments, construction permits from the 1920s, insurance claims after the flood, bankruptcy filings, even handwritten maintenance logs rescued from a moldy storage room. Nothing connected the property to Willow Creek Estates. Nothing. On the 4th day, Sarah pushed away from the conference table. Either they're lying, or someone made county records say something they never said. That possibility sent a chill through me. Document fraud wasn't just unethical, it was a felony. Sarah requested certified copies directly from the county archives, instead of relying on the online database. When they arrived the following afternoon, she spread the originals beside the digital records we'd downloaded earlier. Ben frowned. "They don't match." "They absolutely don't." The legal descriptions were identical. The signatures matched. Even the recording numbers were the same. But one paragraph had magically appeared in the online version. A paragraph granting subterranean archival rights to Willow Creek Estates. Sarah grabbed a magnifying glass. "Look here." The font changed halfway through the sentence. The spacing was inconsistent. The ink density didn't match the rest of the scanned page. "This wasn't typed on the original document. It was added later." She nodded. "Someone digitally altered the county record." Ben let out a low whistle. "That's insane." "No," Sarah replied quietly. "It's calculated." Just then my phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number. When I answered, an elderly man's voice spoke almost in a whisper. "My name is Harold Jenkins." I waited. "I was the deputy county recorder in 1989. My grip tightened around the phone. "I think I know why they're so desperate to keep that vault closed." The room fell silent. Harold continued. "Because 40 years ago, I helped seal it. Every muscle in my body went rigid." "Mr. Jenkins," I asked carefully, "what exactly is inside that vault?" There was a long pause. When he finally answered, his voice was filled with unmistakable regret. "Not what?" He swallowed hard. "Who the records expose." Harold Jenkins refused to speak over the phone. "Lines can be recorded," he said quietly. "And if the people behind this are still watching that hotel, they're probably watching you too." "Then where?" "There used to be a train depot on the east side of town. It's a museum now. Meet me there tomorrow morning. Come alone. Or with your attorney." The line went dead. I looked at Sarah. "You're coming." She didn't argue. The following morning, the old Riverside Rail Museum was nearly empty. The scent of polished wood and machine oil lingered in the restored depot, and an elderly volunteer pointed us toward a retired Pullman rail car parked behind the building. Inside sat Harold Jenkins. He looked to be in his late 70s, with neatly combed white hair and trembling hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup. When we introduced ourselves, he didn't smile. Instead, he reached into a worn leather satchel and placed a sealed envelope on the table. "I've kept this for 37 years. Sarah looked at him carefully. "Why now?" "Because the wrong people finally found the hotel." I frowned. "The HOA?" Harold shook his head. "The HOA is only the latest mask." He slid the envelope toward us. Inside were faded photographs, handwritten meeting notes, and carbon copies of county correspondence dated 1989. One photograph stopped me cold. It showed the very same circular vault hatch we'd uncovered, only it wasn't hidden beneath concrete. It was open. Dozens of bankers' boxes lined metal shelves, stretching deep underground. Across the top of the nearest box was a handwritten label. "Land transfers. Confidential." Sarah's eyes widened. "These aren't financial records." Harold nodded. "They're property records." I looked back at him. "So why seal the vault?" He took a long breath. "Because someone discovered that thousands of acres around Riverside had been transferred using forged deeds during a massive development boom in the 1980s. Ben had once joked that every real estate scandal started with one forged signature. This wasn't one signature. This looked like hundreds." Harold continued. "A small group inside county government agreed to preserve every original record before investigators could compare them to the altered versions." Sarah leaned forward. "Why not destroy the evidence?" "Because one honest judge refused." He reached for another photograph. "The judge ordered every original document sealed until a state investigation could begin." "What happened?" Harold looked down. "The judge died 2 weeks later." The silence that followed felt suffocating. "Accident? Natural causes?" No one had to say the question aloud. Back at the hotel, Sarah immediately began authenticating every document Harold had given us. By sunset, she looked up from her laptop. "They're genuine." "You're certain?" "Paper age matches. Watermarks match. Recording numbers match. Ethan." She looked directly into my eyes. "If these originals are admitted into evidence, every altered deed connected to this scheme could be challenged." "How many properties are we talking about?" She hesitated. "I honestly don't know." Then her phone buzzed. She read the email once, then again. Her expression changed instantly. "What is it?" I asked. "The HOA just amended its lawsuit." "They can do that?" "They did." She turned the screen toward me. The new filing no longer sought control of only the vault. Now they wanted the court to appoint an emergency receiver over the entire Riverside Grand Hotel, arguing that I had become an unfit custodian of historically protected assets. Ben slammed his fist against the table. "They're trying to steal the whole property." Sarah nodded. "They've realized we're getting close." As if on cue, tires screeched outside. I walked to the front window. 3 black SUVs had stopped across the street. Several people stepped out. Not reporters, not police, private security. They never crossed onto my property. They didn't have to. They simply stood there, watching every entrance to the hotel. One of them slowly raised a camera with a telephoto lens and pointed it directly at me. A minute later, my phone vibrated. "Unknown number." I answered without speaking. A calm male voice came through. "Mr. Carter, withdraw your objections in court. And if I don't, you'll lose far more than a hotel." The call disconnected. I looked back at Sarah. She quietly closed the folder containing Harold's evidence and placed it into her briefcase. "We're done negotiating," she said. I nodded. For the first time since buying the Riverside Grand, fear gave way to determination. The courtroom was now the only place left where the truth could survive. The courthouse in Riverside looked exactly like you'd expect from a town that valued tradition. Red brick, white columns, and polished oak doors that had witnessed generations of legal battles. By 8:30 that morning, every seat in courtroom 3B was filled. Local reporters lined the back wall. Property owners from across the county whispered among themselves. Even people who had never cared about the abandoned hotel had shown up. Word had spread that the case was no longer about one building. It was about whether decades of land records could be trusted. Sarah adjusted the stack of binders in front of her and looked at me. "Whatever happens today," she said calmly, "answer only what's asked. Let the evidence do the talking. Across the aisle, Victoria Langley sat perfectly composed in a navy suit, her hands folded neatly on the table. Richard Sloane shuffled through his notes with the confidence of someone who expected another routine victory. When the bailiff announced, "All rise," the room fell silent. Judge Rebecca Holloway entered and took her seat. "Be seated." She scanned both tables before speaking. "We are here regarding the petition filed by Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, seeking emergency control of the Riverside Grand Hotel and its subterranean structure." She paused. "I've reviewed the filings. I have questions for both parties." Richard stood first. "Your Honor, this matter is straightforward. The underground archive has belonged to the association for decades under recorded county documents. Mr. Carter's excavation threatens historically protected materials." Judge Holloway looked up. "So your position is that the association owns the vault?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And the hotel?" "We believe emergency receivership is necessary until ownership issues are resolved." Sarah remained seated, making notes. The judge turned toward her. "Ms. Whitmore." Sarah stood slowly. "Your Honor, before addressing ownership, I'd like permission to examine the authenticity of the documents upon which the plaintiff's entire claim depends." Richard immediately objected. "Irrelevant." Sarah didn't even look at him. "It's the most relevant issue before this court." Judge Holloway nodded. "Overruled. Proceed." Sarah walked to the evidence screen and displayed two nearly identical property records. "At first glance, these appear to be the same document." She zoomed in. "But they are not." The courtroom projector highlighted one paragraph. "This clause grants subterranean archival rights to Willow Creek Estates." She clicked again. The paragraph disappeared from the certified original, obtained directly from the county's physical archives. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Judge Holloway leaned forward. "Explain." Sarah pointed to the enlarged image. "The digital version contains inconsistent font spacing, altered scan resolution, and formatting that does not exist on the original document." Richard rose quickly. "Speculation." "No." Sarah handed the judge a forensic report. "It's supported by a certified digital document examiner." The judge spent nearly a minute reading. Then she looked directly at Richard. "Counsel, would you like to explain why these documents differ?" For the first time all morning, Richard hesitated. "We believe the discrepancy is the result of a clerical scanning error." Sarah smiled faintly. "A scanning error that adds an entirely new legal paragraph." The courtroom erupted in quiet laughter. Judge Holloway struck her gavel. "Order." Sarah wasn't finished. "Your Honor, the defense calls Harold Jenkins." The elderly former deputy recorder walked slowly to the witness stand, took the oath, and settled into the chair. Sarah approached gently. "Mr. Jenkins, what was your position in 1989? "I was deputy county recorder." "Did you participate in sealing the underground archive beneath the Riverside Grand Hotel?" "Yes." "Why?" Harold looked around the courtroom before answering. "Because the vault contained original land records that investigators believed were being systematically replaced with forged versions." The room went completely silent. Victoria's confident expression vanished. Richard shot to his feet. "Objection. Hearsay." Sarah calmly held up another binder. "Not hearsay." She opened it. "We have the original court authorization signed in 1989 by Judge Alan Mercer, ordering those records preserved." Judge Holloway accepted the document, studying the signature carefully. Then her eyes narrowed. She looked from the order to Victoria Langley. "Mrs. Langley," she said evenly, "when exactly did your association first become aware of this vault?" Victoria swallowed. It was the first time since I'd met her that she looked genuinely afraid. And before she could answer, the courtroom doors burst open. Every head in the courtroom turned toward the doors. Two investigators from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation stepped inside, followed by a deputy from the Colorado Attorney General's office carrying a thick evidence case. The room fell silent. Judge Holloway looked up from the bench. "Counsel, do we have an unexpected appearance?" One of the investigators approached the bench and handed the judge a sealed folder. "Your Honor, we apologize for the interruption. We have been authorized to provide the court with evidence obtained late yesterday evening pursuant to a state search warrant." The judge reviewed the cover page for several seconds. Her expression hardened. She looked back at Victoria Langley. "Mrs. Langley, remain seated." Victoria's attorney immediately stood. "Your Honor, I object. We haven't had an opportunity." "You'll have one." Judge Holloway opened the folder. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the pages turning. Finally, she looked directly at Sarah. "Miss Whitmore, were you aware of this investigation?" Sarah shook her head. "No, Your Honor." The judge nodded slowly. "It appears the Attorney General's office has recovered email correspondence, deleted server backups, and financial records indicating that multiple digital property records were intentionally altered over several years. A murmur spread through the gallery. The judge continued. According to these materials, the alterations were designed to create ownership interests that never legally existed. Richard Sloane's face drained of color. Victoria stared straight ahead without blinking. The investigator then requested permission to address the court. Judge Holloway granted it. We executed a warrant at Willow Creek Estate's administrative office yesterday afternoon. During the search, investigators recovered internal communications discussing the Riverside Grand Vault months before Mr. Carter purchased the hotel. The investigator opened the evidence case. Inside were printed emails. One subject line appeared on the courtroom monitor. Wait until someone buys the hotel. They'll do the digging for us. A collective gasp filled the room. Another email followed. The original records must be secured before anyone reads them. Then another. If necessary, use the HOA to claim the basement. I looked at Victoria. She closed her eyes, not in sadness, in defeat. Richard quietly lowered himself into his chair. He didn't object again. Judge Holloway removed her glasses and addressed the courtroom. The evidence before this court establishes that the plaintiff sought emergency relief using documents whose authenticity is now under serious criminal investigation. She looked directly at me. Mr. Carter purchased the Riverside Grand Hotel through a valid recorded deed. Then she looked toward Victoria. The plaintiff has presented no credible evidence establishing ownership of the hotel or the underground archive. She picked up her written order. The petition for emergency receivership is denied. A wave of relief rushed through me, but she wasn't finished. This court further dissolves the temporary restrictions placed upon the defendant's property. She paused, and orders that the underground archive remain secured under joint supervision of the Colorado Attorney General's office and the county recorder until a full forensic inventory is completed. Then came the sentence that changed everything. This matter is referred for criminal investigation involving potential fraud, conspiracy, evidence tampering, and filing of false public records. The courtroom exploded into whispers. Several reporters rushed out the doors to file breaking news. Across the aisle, Victoria's shoulders slumped for the first time. The CBI investigators approached her. Mrs. Langley, one of them said calmly, "We need you to come with us." She looked at Richard. He couldn't even meet her eyes. As she stood, she glanced toward me. "This isn't over." I held her gaze. "No," I replied quietly. "It finally is." Over the following months, investigators examined thousands of original documents stored inside the vault. The archive exposed years of forged land transfers affecting hundreds of properties throughout the county. Several former county employees were indicted. Multiple civil judgments restored ownership rights to families who had unknowingly lost portions of their land through fraudulent filings. Richard Sloane surrendered his law license while disciplinary proceedings moved forward. Victoria Langley resigned as HOA president before later being convicted on fraud-related charges connected to the conspiracy. As for the Riverside Grand Hotel, construction resumed under full legal protection. The building that almost became the centerpiece of the largest property fraud in Riverside's history would instead become the symbol of how that fraud was finally uncovered. For the first time since I bought it, I walked through the hotel's front doors without wondering who might try to take it away. It was finally, unquestionably, home. Nearly 2 years have passed since that day in court, and every time I unlock the front doors of the Riverside Grand Hotel, I still pause for a moment, not because I'm afraid, because I'm grateful. The grand lobby that was once filled with broken glass and collapsing plaster is now alive again. Families gather in the restaurant, travelers check in at the front desk, and live jazz echoes through the restored ballroom every Friday night. Sometimes I stand on the mezzanine overlooking the lobby and smile, remembering what the building looked like the day I first walked inside. The vault still exists beneath the hotel, but it's no longer surrounded by secrecy. After the state's investigation concluded, the original records were preserved by the county as part of a public historical archive. What was once hidden evidence became a reminder that truth can survive, even when people spend decades trying to bury it. Looking back, I realized this fight was never really about an abandoned hotel or a locked steel door. It was about standing your ground when powerful people expect you to surrender simply because they seem untouchable. If I've learned one lesson, it's this. Always know what you own, keep every document, and never let intimidation replace the truth. Sometimes, the smallest piece of evidence can change everything. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and following this incredible journey from beginning to end. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA, property dispute, or a neighbor who thought they had authority they didn't actually have? Share your experience in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel for more gripping HOA and property rights stories, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next upload. Until next time, remember, the truth may stay buried for a while, but sooner or later, someone starts digging.